In a survey of 300 professional fund managers, researchers asked a single question: do you consider yourself above average at your job? 74% said yes. That number is statistically impossible. The average, by definition, is where most people land. The majority of people cannot simultaneously be above it, but the 26% who answered honestly either had unusual self-awareness or unusually poor performance, and in professional environments, those two things are rarely celebrated. This is not a story about fund managers. It's a story about a specific cognitive error that intensifies under exactly the conditions where you'd least expect it: success. The more things go right, the more confident people become in the reasoning that produced the results. And the more confident they become in their reasoning, the harder it is to notice when the reasoning stops applying. The overconfidence trap doesn't wait for failure to announce itself. It builds quietly inside good quarters, accurate forecasts, and decisions that worked out. It compounds with every confirmation that the way you're thinking about a problem is correct. And by the time it becomes visible, by the time the confident decision produces the confident disaster, it's been running for long enough that the people most responsible for it have the most elaborate internal case for why something else was to blame. 93% of American drivers believe they are better than average. Studies replicate this finding across countries, cultures, and decades. The percentage varies slightly. The direction never does. People consistently rate their own abilities above the statistical center, regardless of where they actually sit. What makes this interesting is not the self-flattery. Self-flattery is ordinary. What makes it interesting is the specific mechanism. The more skilled you are at something, the better you are at finding evidence that confirms your skill, and the less likely you are to look for evidence that contradicts it. Expertise and overconfidence are not opposites. They feed each other. The most dangerous overconfidence doesn't live in beginners. It lives in people who have been right enough times to stop checking. The question worth sitting with before anything else: when was the last time you actively looked for evidence that your current approach to something important was wrong? Not a risk to manage. Evidence that would require you to change the approach entirely. Most people asked this question cannot name a recent example. That absence is the data point. The mechanism that researchers call the overconfidence trap operates differently from simple arrogance. Arrogance is a personality trait. The overconfidence trap is a structural feature of how human cognition processes success. When a decision produces a good outcome, the brain registers two things. The outcome was good, and the reasoning that produced it was sound. This is logical but not always accurate. Good outcomes can come from bad reasoning that got lucky, but the brain doesn't make that distinction automatically. It stores the outcome and the reasoning as a paired unit, and each subsequent good outcome reinforces both. Over time, the reasoning accretes a kind of credibility that it may or may not deserve, built on outcomes that may have been influenced by factors entirely outside the reasoning itself. This is what psychologists call the halo effect applied to decision processes. A track record of success creates a perception of judgment quality that can significantly exceed the actual quality of the judgment. Mergers and acquisitions research shows this pattern with particular clarity. Studies of serial acquirers, companies that complete multiple acquisitions over time, consistently find that returns from acquisitions decline with experience. The first acquisition tends to be the most carefully evaluated. By the third or fourth, the analytical process has been compressed, the integration assumptions have been standardized, and the confidence in the team's ability to execute has been elevated. Exactly at the point when the track record has actually done nothing to verify whether the confidence is warranted. A McKinsey study of large capital allocation decisions found that companies with the strongest recent track records were among the most likely to make large, poorly evaluated commitments, not because success made them careless, because success made their internal evaluation processes feel complete when they weren't. Have you ever watched a team or a person become less careful as their results improved? Not in an obvious way, but in the specific way where the process got shorter and the conviction got stronger. Leave a comment. I want to know whether this looked like confidence or competence from where you were standing, because from inside, those two things feel identical. The third mechanism is the most counterintuitive. The most reliable predictor of overconfidence in organizational decision-making is not a string of failures. It's a string of successes followed by a single near miss that gets explained away. Near misses have a specific function in complex systems. They are the warning signal that a failure mode exists. Aviation safety researchers discovered this in the 1980s when studying crash data. The incidents that preceded major accidents were rarely random. They were near misses, events that almost caused the catastrophic outcome but didn't, often for reasons outside the pilot's control. The pilots, having survived, frequently attributed the near miss to their own handling rather than to the proximity of the failure mode. The near miss reinforced confidence rather than installing caution. The same pattern appears in business. Companies that experience a significant market disruption and recover often emerge more confident in their ability to manage disruption, not more cautious. The recovery feels like evidence of resilience. It may actually be evidence of luck. The distinction matters enormously, but from inside the recovery, the two feel identical. Nokia's internal research teams identified the threat from iOS and Android before the iPhone launch. Multiple engineers raised concerns about Symbion's limitations directly to leadership. The concerns were recorded, addressed, and minimized, not because leadership ignored them maliciously, but because the company had a track record of navigating technical challenges and had high confidence in its ability to do so again. The near miss of earlier threats had been successfully managed. The confidence produced by those successful navigations was applied to a threat that was structurally different in ways that the confidence made it harder to see. If this pattern is recognizable, if you've watched a track record become a liability, the like is the direct signal that this kind of analysis is worth making. The pre-mortem technique exists precisely for this moment, not to protect against bad decisions, but to protect against the specific overconfidence that successful track records produce. The pre-mortem assumes failure in advance, which forces the evaluation to happen outside the frame of existing confidence. It's not a guarantee, it's a structural intervention into a process that otherwise has no mechanism for questioning what the track record has already confirmed. There's a sentence that shows up in the post-mortems of overconfident failures with enough consistency that it functions almost as a diagnostic. We didn't see it coming. It almost always isn't true. What's true, in most cases, is that someone in the organization saw it coming and was not heard, or was heard and not acted upon, or was acted upon temporarily and then deprioritized when other signals were louder. The overconfidence trap isn't about not seeing the threat. It's about the specific organizational condition in which the threat gets seen, documented, escalated, and then absorbed into a process that was already confident it knew how to handle things like that. The threat enters the system processes it according to the confidence the system already has in itself. The confidence determines how seriously the threat is taken, and the confidence was produced by the same prior decisions that the threat is now calling into question. This is the loop. The prior success sets the confidence level. The confidence level determines how the new information is processed. The new information is processed in a way that confirms the prior success was the result of good judgment. The confidence level increases. The loop breaks only when the failure is large enough to exceed the capacity of the existing narrative to absorb it. By that point, the loop has usually been running for long enough that the failure is considerably larger than it would have been if the first warning had been taken at face value. The practical thing: identify one assumption in a current plan or approach that has never been stress-tested, not because it's new, but because previous success has made it feel settled. Write down what would have to be true for that assumption to be wrong. Then actually check, not to find problems, to find out whether the confidence in that assumption is calibrated to reality or to track record. Most of the time, it's the track record. Most of the time, the distinction matters more than anyone in the confident room is currently willing to admit. The next episode looks at a case where the overconfidence wasn't gradual. It was structural from the beginning, built into a story that required the numbers to be something they weren't, which raises a different question about whether overconfidence and deception occupy the same spectrum, or whether they're actually different kinds of failure wearing the same face. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical stoicism.